back to our actual session today on securing pilots and contracts in private and public sector. So I'm not sure if Richard's going to join us, but we'll play it by ear if he attends. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session on securing pilots and contracts in the private and public sector. Look, today we'll be having a fairly open discussion on some of the things to consider if you're planning to engage for the first time with large private enterprises or public departments like the NHS. So we'll also be covering just a few pointers about some things to consider at the point you secure a pilot. How do you move that into an ongoing relationship? I'm excited today to be joined by some very awesome industry experts who can share their wonderful experiences with you. And hopefully by the end of our time today, you can take away some helpful ideas to support you on that journey to engage with those types of organizations. Please feel free to add any comments in the Q&A and any questions. We'll try and cover where we can, but hopefully towards the end, we'll have some time for some live responses. I would like to kick things off with a round of introductions. Let me start. My name is Paul Whittle. I'm the Director for Client Services at Top Business Tech, who are a specialist digital technology news publication, which really helps media services to promote what is the trending technology and how that gives a voice to people involved in that landscape. I've been working with some of the largest tech companies on the planet for over 16 years now, but also as part of that journey, helped many kind of startups and scale-ups into their respective markets. I'd like to introduce you to the panel members now as well. Darren, if you want to kick things off.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Darren Page. I've had a 20-year career in IT tech and digital transformation. I now work for a company called Mitchells & Butlers. We're a large UK-based hospitality business managing around 1,600 pubs and restaurants. Previously, I've worked for companies such as The White Company, Sweaty Betty, Virgin, and Volkswagen. So yeah, that's me. And now leading digital change at Mitchells & Butlers.
Cool, thank you. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Chris Holscher of Holscher.one. I've also had a 20 years career in all things IT and related services, consulting services. Spent the last bit more than 10 years with British Telecom Global Services, responsible there for all things industry analyst relations globally for key portfolio areas. Had some good successes there, then figured out that analysts really want to hear from the most innovative companies, and that's startups and scale-ups. So I decided to do my own thing, Holscher.one, and now bringing the tools and benefits of an understanding of industry analyst relations to the startup and scale-up world. That's me.
Cool, thank you. Richard?
Sure, yes. My name is Richard Justinhoven. For my background, I hold a psychology master and closing up my PhD in applied technology, or AI, this year. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm based in Hamburg, Germany. So Chris and I just found out that both of us are from Hamburg. Funny to do that on a UK-based panel. I've started working with a very small local startup company for around 5 years before we merged with Aon to become part of the human line within Aon. I hold a few AI patents that work with different teams to develop DL, ML models for all sorts of applications, all that to help then kind of Aon clients to make better hiring decisions. So I'm somewhat familiar with the situations that some or most of you are in now. Now being 6 years with Aon, I lead the assessment development team. So we continue to do stuff internally and build our own solutions, but then also team up with external partners to broaden any type of offerings that we give out to clients.
Cool, thank you. And Richard, welcome and thank you for joining us. Good timing. Do you want to introduce yourself to everyone here today?
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. You can hear me okay? Can you?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, so I was having some technical issues with the moderator, but I'm in now anyway, so thank you for having me. I'm a commercial director. I've been commercial director for a number of years. We specialize, and with a collective of people, we specialize really these days in doing very high-end business development. So we're talking to governments, which is always a bit of a tricky fish. And also we do sort of very large high-end contracts. So we're currently working with a banking provision client at the moment, talking to all of the majors like JP Morgan and Boney and all of those guys. So
Cool, thanks. And by no means least, but last, Melinda, if you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi there. So my name's Melinda, and I work as a business development and innovation manager at the Lead Teaching Hospital Trust. We've just launched a new venture here called the Innovation Pop-Up. And essentially what we're trying to do, first of all, is nurture a culture of innovation within the trust, sort of helping our clinicians and our staff to really develop the ideas that they have internally, but also as a sort of open door for technology solutions out in the commercial world, trying to connect the unmet needs that we have within the trust with those technology solutions.
Cool, thank you. Cool, right, so everyone, I'll lead on to, I guess, just some questions we've defined with the panel members to give you a little bit of insight. If I start with maybe a framing to how I see kind of the movement of AI, and that being, look, every day, machines and artificial intelligence are getting smarter. They're doing more for us, and they're changing our lives that are, relatively easy to imagine, but however, very difficult to predict, even more difficult to action by businesses and organizations. So look, as enterprises and the public sector look to capitalize on improving, the functions and how they operate, and the ways that they seek to achieve their business goals and outcomes. I just want to kind of ask the group a little bit, what are the traits that those entities will look for in startups and scale-ups that they can bring to the table to help them accelerate that process? Darren, if I go to you first.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So I think the first one there, I think, is pace. Obviously, startups and scale-ups have a unique ability to not be drowned by perhaps traditional corporate governance. And those kind of traits of larger organizations. So I think focus on offering that kind of model, and being light on integrations and being able to prove value early and quickly.
Cool.
Probably secondly, innovation. Again, startups should be looking to disrupt what the large organization is doing to drive either efficiency in operational processes or deliver commercial benefit through innovation within tech. And just taking time to lastly, just taking time to understand the business. I think there's an increasing corporate agenda on things like sustainability and diversity at the moment. I think that presents an opportunity for startups as well to lead the way. But just in general, just taking time to understand that the problem that you're solving, and again proving that value early is key.
Great, cool. Thanks. Some good points there. Chris, I'll lead into you.
Yeah, indeed some really interesting points. One thing that I've observed with startups is maybe a little bit surprising because many people think that those large organizations, when it comes to innovation, they will have their specialists for different types of technologies and all that. So because they're big, they can do everything. But one thing that I've observed is that startups seem to be a lot faster in things like combining different areas of innovation. So building something that I call compound innovation. So building industrial IoT solutions integrated with artificial intelligence and those kinds of things. And so just being quicker on their toes in this kind of area. So I believe that's where startups can really make a difference and lead the game. And that's been kind of a consistent theme that I've seen.
Cool, thank you. And Melinda, from the NHS's perspective, then, can you add some?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective and interacting with a lot of sort of startups and innovators, I think it's important that the startup really does their homework. They understand what the unmet need within the trust is. And then, so that's, in a way, that's their sort of market research. But it's important, I think, that they not only do that and understand that, but then they clearly articulate what the solution is. I mean, I find myself, talking to a lot of startups that really talk about their tech, but are not so clear when they sort of address how it's going to solve the problem that clinicians are facing within the trust. So in some ways, we also sort of suggest that actually maybe come and talk to us a little bit early in your development process, so that actually your focus is the same focus that the clinicians have. So actually you're solving the same problem. That's a little bit more tricky to do, but we do suggest that you do that and encourage that. You must show utility and the value of your product. So that might be in terms of patient outcomes, for example, or of course it could be in terms of cost savings. Again, you need to clearly outline that. This is clearly the public sector. So any spend must be robustly justified. So that's always, something that you need to really consider. And of course, the other thing is the NHS is made up of lots of very complex organizations. And so startups need to be patient, and they need to understand that actually, the priority within the NHS is to treat patients. And therefore, in some ways they're at the back of the queue, and they'll have to show some patience in getting to the right place.
Cool, thank you. And Richie, with some of your AI background there, what are some of the I guess traits that you think will be really useful for startups and scale-ups to bring?
Yeah, sure. I really like that point, Melinda, and I would want to build up on that a bit. So I feel like obviously AI-powered models, they have been trained and developed through and with huge data sets, but there's a risk that they're like overfitted to that sample, and the application as such stays extremely narrow. So often inventors then tend to quote that like total numbers of the data sets they use for the development, and that sounds easily impressive, but then it's less about the actual numbers and more about the applicability of that data set. And how do you ensure that with domain knowledge? So let's take predictive analytic algorithms, for example. So from a technical level, they can be very similar built, no matter the application area. But then the application area dictates most of the details. So if you want to apply them to HR or in the banking sector, and how to work with different available data and legal requirements and lifetime of data and validity of a single data point, all that varies. And to include domain knowledge and immerse that into the model itself is key to success. It's not going to ease to get to the market or kind of to swirl it up and to create some dust, but it's going to be easier and will definitely help to stay there and not just have a number one blower.
Yeah, some really good points. Thank you. And we just started actually touching, I guess, a couple of the challenges that organizations may face that startups and scale-ups can potentially help them with. And Richard, I know you've also got a wealth of experience in working with a number of industries. I think Richard mentioned banking there, and that's maybe somewhere you've had some experience in the past.
Yeah, we've actually got this problem at the moment because we developed a piece of tech, but we're just not looking big enough really for banks to take us seriously. And of course, there's that old adage that goes back to the 1970s that says no one ever got fired for hiring IBM. And the thing is that people will always default to something which is a safe bet, particularly if your job's on the line, and you don't particularly want to hire somebody unknown. But the good news is that oftentimes these banks, they need 3 people to choose from. And if it's an emerging piece of technology, they don't necessarily have 3 people to choose from. So you can get yourself in the ring. The way we're solving it currently with the guys I'm working with is we're putting together consortiums. So we're collecting ourselves together with some other people. And we're simply trying to recognize that for something as vast as a bank, they want to take 0 risks. So they don't want to take any technical risk in integrating with a piece of tech that they don't know. So if we can possibly make that onboarding such that it's a seamless process, which we've successfully done, then of course it just makes it easier for everybody because nobody wants a tough time sort of taking on a new procurement.
Exactly, yeah. And Darren, anything to kind of add there with your company?
Yeah, I think for us, flexibility on the commercial model as well, whether that's investment, rev share, service provider, I think they all have their own merits. Challenges with existing service provider not innovating in their own fields, so just try and disrupt, really try and disrupt what they're doing. So I think
Cool. And Richie, again, from like an Aon perspective, what kind of some of the major challenges that you face?
I think it's And I think that's fair to speak, not just for Aon, but for kind of lots of the bigger corporate environments. That if you start from the ground up, there's a long way you have to go before you have actually something tangible that you can showcase. Who am I telling that? You all know that, and it kind of it's great when you're there to have the first real prototype or the first working model, but it takes time. So in turn, big corporations are sometimes reluctant to finance at very, very early stages because there's little to nothing that you can hold up and say, hey, see, it generally works. We just have to bring it to market, or we just have to productionalize it or scale it up. So it is easier to turn around and look for startups who already went through these initial phases and have these tangible models, which makes it so much easier then to get company-wide buy-in, agreement on high investment levels, and to kind of jump on that topic to then really scale it up.
Okay, cool, thank you. And Melinda, you opened today talking about, I guess, some of the initiatives with the NHS. Would you say there are any kind of key focuses?
Very much so. I mean, so at the Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust, we're in a position where we're building 2 new hospitals on our sort of city centre site. So these hospitals are going to be sort of digital hospitals of the future, really trying to bring in all this new sort of technology that we're discussing. But of course, the challenges that we face are fairly standard. So actually, our 3 main focus areas are remote monitoring, for example, using wearables technology, and sort of the creation of virtual wards, which seems a little bit sort of counterintuitive given that we're building new hospitals. But actually, it's to sort of try and address the whole issue of bed capacity and trying to move people through that hospital. And that's the second challenge, which is actually patient flow through the hospital, just understanding where patients are and trying to use technology, tracking technology, sort of live dashboards to try and, move patients through the hospital seamlessly. And then, of course, there's the tracking of assets and equipment, making sure that equipment and patients are in the right place in order to just maximize the efficiency with which the trust can treat patients. So those are the sort of 3 main challenges: so remote monitoring, tracking, and patient flow that we're focusing on. I mean, there are many others, more focused along, the sort of specific, different sort of clinical specialties, but they're the 3 main ones, I would say.
Fantastic, thank you for sharing that. So I'll just move on then to ask about partnerships and how maybe the audience today would consider partnering with an organization to either add more breadth to their offering or to, I guess, support them and engage with public sector or enterprise. Chris, what's your experience been with that?
Unmuting myself is pro tip number 1. So I think breadth of offering is kind of a 2-edged sword, because on the one hand, it feels like you can broaden your contact area, and that always sounds good. But then as a startup or even scale up, it doesn't come across as too credible when you try to be the better IBM, or you try to do everything or have a very broad offering, because people are aware of your resources and the stage that you're at. So in my experience, really, it's much better to actually focus kind of on your absolute sweet spot, and also ensure that you're addressing your kind of circle 0 type of customers. So the people that you would almost like actively have to push away from you to not do business with you. That's what I would define as your circle 0. And because that means that you can win super fans. And those super fans, they will propel your business forward. They will advocate for you and everything. So then again, how you can use partnerships is to actually reach those largest ones of your circle 0 customers, so, through the reach of big partners, because they may have those access into the decision centers and those kind of things. So basically, I try to stand on the shoulders of a giant, to reach those circle 0 customers. And and then just remember to stick to what you do best, rather than trying to broaden things. So be very aware of actually how you use partnerships. That would be my recommendation there.
Great, thank you. And Richie, I'll pass on to you.
Sure, yes, and I think it's interesting that I'm going to absolutely 100% agree on what Chris just said. It's a partnership has to fit to your overall story and vision. So I feel like if the vision gets if the sole intention is short-term revenue or increased cash flow, whatever it is, for the sake of derailing what you're actually trying to aim for and what you stand for and the unique proposition that you have, partnerships can be dangerous in that way. You want to demonstrate kind of to future long-term partners and other enterprises that you want to talk to, that you can hold your ground and steer towards your end goal that you have for your offering. And then keeping that in mind, then strategic, more the long-term partnerships, especially with as Chris said, with specific individuals in large corporations, can help you really boost and then quickly scale up.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And Darren, I know you work with a number of startups and scale-ups in Mitchell and Butlers. Did they, work with partners to engage with you initially, or do they kind of come more directly?
Typically more directly, I guess. Where we've seen it, where there's a larger outfit that's kind of with that startup. I think they're there, I guess, for procurement, navigation type and advisory reasons. But I think for us, when we see that, it's really important to not lose the agility of a startup and the innovation that they bring too. And that's really important for us.
Yeah, really good point. Yeah, really good point. And Melinda, then, from a kind of NHS standpoint.
Yeah, so I guess we find ourselves in something of a dilemma, because we want to nurture innovation, as I've already described, and we want to work with startups and SMEs because of the things that we've been sort of suggesting. They're agile, responsive, and generally quite passionate about what they do. But actually, what's critical for the NHS is to provide a service that has longevity. So there is a risk with sort of dealing with and partnering, collaborating with these small enterprises. We've had several instances where those sort of partnerships have developed, but those companies have then been bought out by larger organizations, and the service that they provide no longer is a priority for them. Clearly, it's critical for us, and so that service then languishes. So we have to consider that quite carefully. I mean, part of mitigating that is really developing this notion of pilot studying, really developing a robust sort of evidence base for that business. And that helps us to sort of, reduce those risks in terms of who we then move forward with.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And we'll touch on actually kind of pilots and tender processes in just a section. But I just want to make sure that Richard has the opportunity to add to this point about partnerships before we move on.
Oh, I think the right partnership can be the absolute sort of golden ticket, really, to getting your way in. And certainly, if you can partner with a larger organisation who maybe already have the ins with the organisation, so there's lots of people already reselling into large organisations who are already on the procurement list, and that's a great way to piggyback in. And then I do actually believe very strongly that if you can get in some way, shape, or form, then actually it's personal relationships that can then help, because you can go to the internal exhibitions and conferences, start talking to those people, get to know people, and then of course that builds your credibility. I'd say that is probably the most efficient route to get into some of the larger organisations, speaking in a very broad sense.
Okay, cool. Thanks everyone. So I'll just move then on to talk about the tender applications, and if some of the audience today are considering, either applying for public or kind of closed private tender, what's the best recommended approach for them to consider? Darren, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for my side, top one is like, do your homework, know the company, know who you're talking to, and the outcomes that you're trying to solve. You know, and that also means, you know, when you talk in that tender process, if it's tech-led, you need to make that in a language that somebody in the business would understand, you know, i.e. an accountant versus, you know, not someone in the IT team, because ultimately it's probably going to be the accountant that signs the check to do something rather than always the IT person. You know, as an example, we're running a pilot at the moment with a service that scrapes delivery aggregators, so Just Eat, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, those types of people. You know, that data is pulled together into a platform, and then, you know, we can see things like missing images, or, you know, at scale, you know, we've got so many different restaurants live at scale. Where are our problems? And if you go and make a small adjustment here, what is the commercial benefit? So that pilot has all been shaped around proving, okay, well, if we make these changes to this part based on what you've told us, what is going to be the output from a commercial benefit? And if that is then, you know, fantastic at scale of an organization of our size, then it's a lot easier to move from pilot to you know, something, you know, broader, like a contract or whatever for a further rollout. So yeah.
Cool, that makes sense. Yeah. And then Chris, in some of your experience, then what are the kind of things companies can do to prepare for applying for a tender?
Yeah, I'll come with a with unusual perspective because of what I do. So shameless plug here. We know that while in the B2C space, approximately 70% of buying decisions are driven by a vendor's website. So in the B2B space, however, some 75% of shortlisting decisions and tech strategy decisions are actually primarily impacted by the research and by direct advice of independent industry analysts. And, you know, the likes of Gartner and Forrester and IDC and HFS and so on and so forth. So understanding this part of the playing field is crucial in the space generally. So, and that's a big gap in the startup and scale-up space, as far as I observe. And I see Richard nodding there. And just to prepare for this, know the relevant industry analysts in your space. Make sure they know you. Make sure they understand you. You know what you can do, what your strategy is, what you don't want to do. You know your actual focus, and also probably be able to point to their research and let their research independently speak for your point of view. That can be incredibly powerful, because, you know, these people are pulled into the decision centers at the point when it matters. You know, at first there is a lot of PR and material, and everybody does their pitches and their presentations and stuff. And then at the very end of the game, then industry analysts are pulled into the decision rooms to unravel the spaghetti of opinions and, you know, patting yourself on the back to actually find, you know, what is the actual truth and what's the best for this vendor. So that's a very good preparation to do this upfront, even before the tender, and then throughout the game. And that is probably the best advice from my end on that question.
Okay, cool. Thank you. You mentioned obviously Gartner there, a very recognized body. Are there accreditations available for maybe companies that are just starting out as well?
Absolutely. So engaging with an industry analyst doesn't cost anything. So briefings are always free. Don't let anyone tell you that analyst relations is a play for pay game. That's not the case. And if so, then run away. Run. You know, that's because then it's just glorified PR, and that's not what you need for this purpose. So there's a distinct difference there. And then, of course, you can get deeper into it by buying into their research programs and getting more insight, extract more insights from them. And through that, of course, you build their understanding of what you do as a business and gain credibility with their analysts, and thereby make yourself more likely to be recommended to potential partners, to potential buyers, to potential investors and everything. But the initial engagement is typically doesn't cost any money, so it's actually easy to get into that if you know why, because this is really not a DIY game, because it's very different from your standard marketing or sales pitch. If you go with a marketing or sales pitch into an analyst conversation, you basically you kill the relationship before it starts, because that is what they don't need. They need something different. But that would probably go too deep now.
Okay, cool. Thanks, some really, really useful points there. And Richard, I'll pass over to you.
Which one?
Richard, I think we swapped to Richard and Richie again, just to make it a bit easier. So yourself, Richard.
Oh, me? Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny. I'm just zooming out from this particular point. I mean, what we find is with governments in particular, governments have it's tricky because they're constantly changing, and so actually the people that you're talking to this month might not necessarily be the people that you're talking to in a couple of months' time, and then there are reshuffles. And I don't think it's a secret that governments, because they're generally on 5-year terms, there's a lot of short-termism. So somehow or another, you have to plot a way whereby you can actually have longevity across all of those changes. And once again, I do think it comes down to just showing your face. I do think that a lot of the time, these things are just all about showing up and just being there in the room when the opportunities come out, so that people remember you. And that way you can get longevity and continuity. I think that's a real key.
Okay, cool, thank you. Richie, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, maybe I piggyback on my psychology background. So you often see that people typically like to talk about themselves. So make use of that. Listen to how they take what they to hear, what they look for in partnerships. So listen to their experiences as well, and build on that. Asking questions is something that we don't see that often, but is not only allowed, but then also encouraged during that process. So show that you're invested versus just going through your prepped plans and slides. Chris said that before, no one wants to hear a generic pitch. So do listen to what the audience wants to hear. And then I think it's fair game to offer up to team up with someone from the organization or from the entity that you talk to, and they're very likely going to have a trusted person either internally or on an advisory board or wherever, who can properly take a look under the hood and validate your claims from a technical standpoint. Something that can be easily done with a signed NDA. And that claim then, once you have that from that trusted advisor or person, goes a long way as well. So yeah, you can look for accreditation credentials from third parties, but then you definitely need to make sure that they count in the field and are known in the field. So otherwise, the worth of the certification is extremely undervalued because the organization that you talk to does not know the actual value.
Cool, thank you. I think we've covered a fair bit about kind of continuation following kind of pilot activity, but I just wanted to I guess readdress it with you, Melinda, because I know in your department particularly it's a kind of a unique way of interacting with procurement and so on. So I just want to open it up for any of those that are maybe engaged with the NEXS and kind of in a pilot phase, but they're looking to I guess kind of move beyond that into a more ongoing relationship.
Yeah, very much so. So, I mean, in many ways, it goes to Chris's point earlier about that sort of sort of tender work that you have to do. So for us, what we're trying to do is develop, collaborations and partnerships with these SMEs to design these pilot studies that address what the need is to generate, robust evidence. So where we're in that space where we will partner with companies in order to do that design work. We're linked into, for example, health economics units at the university here at Leeds, and we can help bring that together and obviously sort of smooth the pathway for that study to take place. Clearly, there is a need for the SME to pitch and gain traction with the particular clinicians. So they need to have champions within the trust, in order for it to go anywhere at all. But of course, once we've completed that process, that's our kind of work done. We then hand that over to NHS procurement. And then that's where the tender process comes in. So obviously, in a way, this is the pre-market assessment work that we're doing that we then hand over to.
Cool, thank you. So anyone else to add to that point before we move on to the last subject?
I think in terms of procurement people, I mean, I remember we had an opportunity, we were pitching actually a banking, this was a while ago now, and we'd gone through the entire process and we ticked all of the boxes. And then at the last minute, a guy walked in who was their procurement officer, and his pure role was to say, can you do this for a third of the price? Yeah. But I just thought, and so you get these kind of curveballs coming in like all of the time. And so actually, I do think you have to prepare yourself for it's mitigating the risks really, and actually looking at the different risks. And sometimes, and very briefly, I mean, sometimes you can just become so entrenched in the process that in fact you're blindsided by the commercial downside of what you're actually agreeing to. And this has happened at enormous levels. So there's a very, very famous huge IT contract that went in with a major bank of billions. And in fact, about, I don't know, I think 4 years into the contract, the company that had won the contract turned around and went, we actually just can't do this for the money. It's as simple as that. They all just pulled out. So I do think you need to kind of just look basically as, are we going to make any profit on this, or are we simply just wasting our time? You know, is actually one of those kind of sense checks you just have to do occasionally. You know?
And Chris, did you want to add something there? Was it a fly?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I can absolutely sympathize with what Richard just said there. And one observation that I've made over and over and over again in both from the time when I was working in a very large company, but also supporting startups, is that startups are often kept very long in the game with tenders, just to be that interesting, innovative, informative type of vendor to have in the process and inspire questions and inform the purchasing people, just to at the very end come with a question like this: can you do this for half the price or something? And not even in order to actually buy your service, but in order to press IBM on it, and that is just so frustrating. And the reason why that is that as a startup, you must understand that you're not only interesting, you're also to some degree, you're a little bit of a risk to a purchasing department, because nobody knows you. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, but with a startup, that's different. So that's the reason why you definitely need to build that trust via third parties, through your partner, through analysts, through however you can do it, to circumvent what Richard is just described there, and actually make a strength out of the risk if you can.
Cool, some really good points. Melinda, go on.
So I just wanted to add to that is that, part of our work that we do is to begin those conversations with procurement. What will be persuasive for you? What factors will you take into account? For example, patient benefit. How do we quantify that? What does persuasive look like? And we can sort of nurture those conversations so that we understand where we're trying to go.
Cool, thank you. Right, I just wanted to move on then to sharing maybe some of your experiences with other startup or scale ups with the group today. Richard, I'll start with yourself.
Experiences with other startups.
Well, in your case, it's maybe with yourself from back in the 99-2000 period.
Oh yes, well, yeah, it can be an advantage because we certainly had an opportunity. We'd started a digital agency back in 1999, and I don't know if any of you remember that era, but everyone was just kind of making it up as they went along. We really were, and so we managed to get in to pitch GlaxoSmithKline and a couple of other people. And in fact, the good news was that level of innovation in the industry creates a flat hierarchy. So we were pitching up against some of the big guys, and they were subcontracting to us. So you sometimes have this opportunity when there is a major piece of innovation. I should imagine the same's happening with blockchain right now. where large companies are looking at blockchain, and the only companies they can really go to are smaller companies that are providing blockchain services. So there are sometimes value moments where you can kind of get in under the radar, as it were. And you know, we are currently in an extraordinary moment in business history where things are moving very, very fast. So if you do look agile and you look as though you're the only people that know what they're talking about, you can have a really good opportunity to get in.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And then Chris, I think you said one of your customers had a similar story of coming up against some of the big boys.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing, right? So Richard and I seem to have made lots of similar experiences there, but going against the big guys, if you can really, and this was going to the point that Melinda also made, if you can express and explain and validate, what your value proposition is, and demonstrate it, and have some external independent promotion for this through credible third parties, then you can get a long way. And particularly one of my clients even succeeded in basically against like 30 of all the big guys in a tender to win a crucial bit of Volkswagen's digital production platform. So and that was so impressive, because you can imagine Volkswagen is a company that does a very, very thorough qualification and tender process, and that was just beautiful and just brilliant to see that those kind of things are possible, even with a startup that at the time was like 25 people. So quite incredible things possible if done right.
Cool, thank you. We've got about two minutes left. There's currently no questions in the Q&A slot. If anyone has anything, please add it now. If not, Richie, I know you've got some really relevant experience of coming from a startup to join Aon, so if you can share that with everyone.
Yeah, sure. I think that's probably the story from the other side then. So yeah, I feel like what we brought to the table in terms of products and software at those days is now being used all across the globe, so touching 35 million people a year. And before that, we only reached like barely 3 million, which so Aon increased that massively, that number, like 10 times easily, and still growing. But then if you look at that, it's not just the width, it's also the people we reach and talk to are now on a different level. So the Aon has a strong reputation and brand, kind of wide network to other firms. So now we talk to the C-suite directly, and within that package that Aon is offering to clients, the portfolio from the startup I've been with is included there, and with that is presented to the entire organization. But then also, if you look at that, it's quite interesting that that type of relationship counts for both ways. So very often, it's the portfolio of the startup that we start the client discussion with, because it's hip, it's innovative, it's intriguing, it's different. So it helps to get the conversation starting, get the foot in the door, and show that big organizations can be nimble, can be agile, can be innovative as well, thanks to the achievement of that startup in their kind of our old portfolio, so to speak.
Definitely.
Cool, fantastic, thank you. So a little conscious of time now. We're coming up to 10 past, which is our due allotted slot for today's session. So if there are no questions from the kind of Q&A perspective, I'd like just to thank everyone for their time and attending today, and hopefully you've taken away some kind of key points to think about whilst you're going to be approaching enterprise or the public sector, particularly NHS from Melinda's perspective. If you do have any questions that do come to mind, still feel free to add them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and get back to you. Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.